and welcome back to Gatekeepers. You are watching Jaide's Tabletop Tavern. If you enjoy the content this evening, please consider hitting that like button. If you really enjoyed tonight's content, please consider hitting the subscribe button, as it will help both channels grow. You will also find the links to the other YouTubers in our show in the description below. If you're not a member of our Discord, please consider joining if you'd like to pose any questions to future Gatekeepers content. Without further ado, let's get into the panel. My name's Jaide, and I will be leading tonight's discussion on languages as challenge, or as a challenge for players. Now, this content was brought to us by one of our regular viewers or regular members of the Discord. You're going to be bringing in Shadow from Shadow and Sun. Welcome, sir.
How's it going, folks?
Yes. I do believe, yes, it is Mar Hawkman who brought us this topic. So thank you. Go ahead.
Is Mar joining us?
Yeah, Mar is currently in chat. Mar, if you would like to hop in the show and talk with us, you're more than welcome to, sir. This is your topic, after all. Let me know, and I will send you a link directly.
Yeah, I feel weird being a panel. Like being a committee. I'm not the committee. Not Princess Leia's line, though.
Yeah, I actually can't remember if Princess Leia said that, but it's been a very long time since I've seen those films. Yeah, so tonight's topic is about languages, customs, and cultures in tabletop RPGs. How we can kind of make it a challenge for players and make it less boring or pedantic, I would say. I don't know if pedantic's the right word. Less of a grinding halt to a campaign. All right, so Mar Hawkman, I will be sending you a link directly. Give me one moment, sir, and I will get that for you. Bear with me, folks. I'm doing stuff in the background over here on Discord.
No worries, man.
There we go. While he gets settled and gets into the chat, I will, get through the opening monologue of this. So, oftentimes, when playing or planning a game, we come across strange new places, new civilizations, different from the ones we're familiar with. Or are we coming across those? In many games, the strange new culture or civilization is not really that strange at all. Especially not, compared to what we ran across in the previous session or maybe in a similar region, ages ago. And this is, I want to say that this is because game masters spend more time focusing on the actual adventure more so than spending time on developing culture in an adventure, than the adventure. Please welcome Mar Hawkman to the stream. Welcome, sir.
Good evening.
Now, to kind of continue the monologue here in a moment, for just a bit, I know I am guilty of not pursuing cultures or languages as much as I pursue the adventure itself. That's where everyone wants to spend their time, is in the adventure, not necessarily dealing with the culture. And as a world builder, I kind of kick myself in the pants because I do make strange cultures. I do make cultures that are unique and different, and that should or can be explored. Um, but I never present languages or cultures in such a way that it becomes a challenge for my players to want to dive into. And I'm hoping that tonight we can kind of discuss how we can make it fun for players and game masters alike. Oh,
One of the things that I've seen people do that's a very good way of using languages and cultures is, it's something Tolkien did with Lord of the Rings. Is you walk into a room, you look at the walls, and like, oh, this was a dwarven building, because you look at the walls and you see things that look like dwarven designs, but also dwarven writing carved into the walls. It's a great way of adding flavor to scenes like that.
Oh yeah, definitely good to add flavor. Setting a scene with writing or with strange languages or ancient languages is really great for setting the mood and the tone. But I think a lot of players kind of gloss over it because it's not what the adventure is to them.
I mean, also there's the whole thing of like putting like little cryptic hints and things that people read, and if they don't bother taking the time to read it, well,
Right. Sending a light care package to you, Mar Hawkman. So if you're not familiar with how we've been doing things lately, the person moderating the stream will create like a bunch of questions to help lead the topic, and I'm kind of explaining the secret behind the sauce here on the show, but that's fine. So I'm sending you some of the leading questions, some of the focuses of tonight, just so we're all on the same page. Shadow and myself have had time to review and read through these since this weekend, so I'm going to be making sure that you have the same level of information as the rest of us. So,
well, you say this weekend, but I just saw him this morning. I'm not going to lie.
Okay. I see that the class is a little late to the game. Okay, I see. That's fine.
To be honest, the issue, is either written or verbal. Now, when it's written, the read language spell in a fantasy game usually for me would be AD&D or what have you. And most of the D&D games, fantasy games, the read language is like a first level spell, and if necessary, the party will just hang out until the magic user deciphers it, and it's, plain as day. You read it, and now you know the info dump, so to speak, and you move on. Verbal, that's entirely different because it is usually a higher level spell, and you can't wait around to rememorize that spell if you didn't take it and work into it. So it's a more complicated thing, which is funny because it's science fiction. It's the exact opposite. The verbal is usually handled. My son and I were talking about this morning, or actually this afternoon, because I actually asked his advice on it. In sci-fi, you got the Babelfish or the Universal Translator, or you've got it's not an issue because everybody speaks the same language no matter what planet they're on, a la Star Trek or even Star Wars, where
Stargate.
we the audience don't know what they're saying unless we read the subtitles at the bottom, or in the case of droids, we just have to guess by the response of the listener. And like when Luke's talking to the droids, we don't know what the droid said or R2 said, but we have a good idea because of what 3PO said or what R2 said.
Yeah, there's good context there.
But then if it's a written alien language, then it's a whole big deal. Then they've got to find an expert or a translator, something like that. And it's kind of weird how it's, the opposite because of genre. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one game I've seen play with this that I think did it rather well is Hyperborea, because each of the races in Hyperborea has a language, or in some cases more than one, that is particular to their race. But there's a shared language that most races in Hyperborea can speak called Common, which is not really something that everyone knows, but most people do.
Yeah.
Right, and that was kind of the same way with most other fantasy games. But even in Robert E. Howard's works, it really didn't pan out that way. Conan just managed to pick up every language imaginable, which by AD&D or other game standards, puts his intelligence incredibly high, which kind of belies everything Hollywood and everybody else has come to think about Conan without reading the Conan novels. So that's kind of interesting, because as far as I know, Howard himself, he spoke English and maybe a little bit of Spanish, but I never, I don't remember him in his biographies and whatnot, him being fluent in multiple languages.
All right. So
Maybe that was just something he figured he better take care of with Conan just being a genius.
So Bo actually Bo makes a good point here. The question becomes then, how do the rules handle languages? Do they take skill slots? And if so, will the players actually spend slots or points to learn the languages? And that is a big part of the game that I have been playing with 3.5 edition of D&D is you've got to spend skill points to learn languages, but that's just kind of like a silly workaround. You can learn a language in a day. Once you level up, you spend skill points, and you guess what? You just learn language. Truthfully, that's not how that works. And I honestly think that you should, as a player, if you come across a language or a culture that is different, and you want to communicate or want to hang around the area, you should become invested as a player in what the game master has made, and take the time to learn the culture and learn the language. And then, Scott up here says, is language culture? Or is language equivalent to culture? I'm not going to say it's equivalent to culture. It is part of culture.
You can learn the language without learning the culture, and vice versa. And some languages, like, for example, Latin, you're never going to learn the culture, but you can still learn the language, even though nobody really uses it.
There's actually several ancient languages in real life that are like that, where people can read and write them, but no one still uses them for daily life.
Right. I was just using the most common denominator.
I'm just making my way through chat here.
The idea, though, that
languages
might exist in a fictional setting, that's something that's very interesting, though, because, it's like, well, like in the Hyperborea setting, they have what's called esoteric Hyperborean, which no one actually uses that in daily life. It's something only a handful of scholars actually know, because the people who actually used it are dead and gone.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things.
That's much like ancient Latin and the in the earliest days of Rome, nobody really uses the language, and the culture itself, though gone, still left traces behind.
Yeah,
and influenced other languages.
And esoteric Hyperborean, if you go to the right places, you just like walk into a room and it's like, what's this stuff written on the walls? because the people who used it were technologically advanced until whatever happened. I'm really not sure what happened to them.
I'm trying to get
That
caught
would
up
be
on
the
chat.
sinking of the
There was a lot of chat happening. Max says goblins chip and yip and gibberish until the PCs can speak the same language. And two, I create phonetic alphabet and give the PCs portions of the Rosetta Stone over time for written text. Those are very good ways to immerse or like catch on as a player over time. I will say that. That's
The ciphertext approach is something that I would only bother with if I was actually going to do like paper handouts with a whole bunch of stuff written on it. I mean, it's certainly doable, but it takes physical props.
And an open-minded player group.
Yeah, well, like so some people would just like scratch their heads at it and be like, "Yeah, someone else can worry about that."
Yep.
And Scott says language is informed by culture. Culture changes languages, but he's not sure that language changes culture.
I can't think of a single example.
I'll have to circle back to that. I'm going to start that one and circle back to it.
Language changing culture in real life, I can think of examples of that, but it's like because of the people learning the language were being educated in a culture that was not the same as that of their ancestors, so they were not learning to do things the same way their ancestors were. But that's a general education thing and not technically specific to the language itself.
28 millimeter. I will get circled back to this one in the last hour of the evening because I do want to go over like a quick bullet point or bullet charted cultures for this.
By the way, howdy to everybody in chat.
So my first main topic question this evening, since we've kind of rambled on at the beginning of this, so I want to start diving into the questions. What can make different languages interesting in campaigns, and how can we express this in play?
Well, one example from a Hyperborea game that I was actually in is certain players in our group were able to read this ancient textbook written by someone in esoteric Hyperborean. The other players just their characters just couldn't read it, which it gives you your character a stat buff, and honestly, that's as far as it really went in terms of like gameplay mechanics. It was mostly just flavor. But a different example is, okay, here the locals speak this language. One of your characters speaks that language, and only one. So ended up having that player do all of the talking with the locals, and the rest of the players just kind of sort of had to help them out with stuff.
What about you, Shadow? What can make different languages interesting during campaign play, and how do you express that?
Well, you gotta kind of go out of your way. You've got to make you kind of gotta I hate to use the term, but railroad them into it. Otherwise, they're, depending on the group, very likely to not actually care or just, muscle and sword their way through just about every other situation. You've got to kind of, lure or, carrot or stick them into caring. And, depending on the situation, you're going to have to tailor make reasons for that to be somehow beneficial to them. Otherwise, they're, going to find some other way, whether it be magic or, like I said, a technological device or hiring an interpreter, and let them, deal with it. You've got to, sort of, reward them or potentially reward them for participating.
I agree. If you present languages or some kind of unique culture or language to the players, and they don't bite into it, that was like your entire session planning was how are they going to deal with the role play of this culture if they can't understand the language. A lot of your planning's shot for the night, and you end up running just a dungeon crawl. Just to please everybody and put your plans up on the shelf for the next time. However, if your players
I
do
disagree with Max here, says that you have shit players. Well, no, because I personally don't care. Does that make me a bad DM when it can be game mechanics away and get on to the things that I know the players are interested in? I don't think so. I'm not gonna play the way someone else tells me to play. I'm going to play the way I enjoy and the way my players enjoy. Knowing my players, if they don't care, that's just as bad as railroading them. I'm at least try to provide an adventure that's interesting.
I think Max was commenting about something 5 or so minutes ago.
Oh, okay. There's no timestamp on the chat here, so it's hard to say.
It was 8:01, so.
Okay, well, Max, I'm not an overly complicated guy.
So, for me, making interesting languages and expressing them, it starts kind of with how the players are greeted by this culture or this group of people. And the greeting sets the tone for all of the future engagements with that group. If the party comes in and they're speaking, their core language, and the town they would come into, greets them, and they, clearly don't understand what the greeting was, but they understand it was a greeting of some kind, especially if the culture has also a trigger custom or like some kind of mechanism that says, hey, I'm greeting you with a bow, with a handshake, whatever the case might be. If player, and oftentimes I will find players will engage immediately with a good, strong greeting, whatever the language barrier might be. So what are some of the cultural implications of different languages, or that different languages may have in TTRPGs, such as speaking language of a rival culture versus a friendly or neutral culture?
That could go on for days. I mean, there are all kinds of different customs and taboos and mistranslations that can arise with all kinds of those situations. I've been all over the place, all over the world, and you'd be surprised at subtle little things, like, for example, I'll try to make it quick. Pointing in the Philippines, you don't do that. You point, and that's you might as well be using your middle finger. They use their lips. They go, they use their lips to point at or indicate something. And us, we here in the States, we point at everything, and that's just an example of something really simple that can get you potentially in a lot of trouble or get you earn you a reputation as being rude or or a barbarian or uncultured or uncivilized or just you name it.
Yeah. Do you ever present cultural implications for using language in your games there, Mar Hawkman?
Games I've played in, I can't think of anywhere we actually went that in depth into cultures in that sort of respect of like mannerisms that are unique to a culture, that sort of thing. There are, of course, like the things that most of these things are thrown in for flavors. Like, this is the way these guys do their thing, and so on. But not something where it's like you risk the ire by not doing the right gesture when you talk to someone.
So if, for example, I'm just going to put this one out there. If, for example, you came into an elven village, elven hamlet or something, and you presented your cultural greeting, and it just happened to be the language of orcs, how do you think that would go over?
Well, they wouldn't like it. The question is how intense would their reaction be, I suppose.
So that there is a cultural implication of language being used. If you use the language of a most hated enemy, the response of the NPCs should be to, well, run you out of town or be very standoffish to you, because obviously you're speaking the tongue of the enemy, and they might know the tongue of the enemy.
Or they might not, and they'll just get really, really confused at what you're saying.
Or they might become terrified that you're raiders of the enemy culture. So there are strong implications when learning, when experimenting with language for both players and game master side of the table, that if you keep it in mind of like what the cultures are in the area and what their enemies are, and if the players misstep by using the wrong language, like that can be a barrier that you can, or a challenge that you can present to the players, or if you curse them so that they can, while they might understand each other, they can only speak in a certain language, whether or not they know it or know that language. This might get a little railroady if you do this, but a curse laid upon them to only speak in Goblin, and they can understand each other just fine. But when they walk into town and they're speaking Goblin, someone is probably going to be like, okay, one, are they actually humans, or are they hobgoblins in disguise? Are they our enemy, or are they our friend? What's going on? So it's going to present a challenge that your players are going to have to figure out how to overcome. They might realize, oh, hey, that witch cursed us. Let's go to the church and see if we can get whatever this is removed. So it would be...
Go ahead. The townsfolk actually speak Goblin, in which case they'd understand. How would they necessarily know they're speaking Goblin?
So if your culture has to deal with a enemy culture long enough, you start picking up on certain phrases of that enemy language,
I can see that.
or of that rival culture. You can also do this with friendly languages. Consider the Gaulish people. Set the Wayback Machine to the 400s or even earlier. You had the Gaulish people. While they all spoke some form of Gaulish language, they had different dialects, but they could pick up on all the different dialects, and they picked up on Latin or Roman language. Even when Rome was, expanding into the Gaul lands. So they knew certain phrases, certain words of the legionnaires because they were a hated enemy. And to know the enemy's language is to be able to, not necessarily communicate, but intercept communications and learn from them.
Well, one analogy that I thought of was that there's a big difference in real life between being able to recognize a language and being able to speak it. Like, for someone walked up to you on the street and said "Hola." I mean, you would probably recognize that as Spanish. I mean, you might not actually speak Spanish, and you might not be able to do anything more than do a basic greeting and response in Spanish, but you would immediately know that what the language was because you've heard it before.
Mhm.
And
You
that's
answer,
that. That was kind of going back to that thing you were saying about people in an elvish village immediately knowing that someone was speaking in the goblin language.
mm-hmm. Yeah. To answer Scott Clark here, with elves and orcs, is it cultural or racial? A bit of both. They would, so elves have a culture, orcs have a culture. They are not the same, and they also have different languages. Not just because their races are different, but because their cultures are different. And language is tied to culture, it kind of intrinsically. Like you can learn a language, you don't necessarily have to learn the culture, but if you learn the culture, the language helps you understand the culture faster if you know the language.
Well, one thing that I've actually learned in my attempts at learning various foreign languages in real life is that the way languages are constructed, honestly, kind of sort of, you need to think differently in order to be able to actually properly use the language. I mean, like, well, one example of this is just like the order that some languages put things in sentences. You need to think a certain way in order for the sentence to make sense to you. Which I guess is that's kind of a cultural thing, but I'm not really 100% sure exactly how it relates to the real world cultures. So,
You always get the curse words for free in language. That's the first thing people learn is how to curse in another language. But that kind of gets back to Bo's thought here on idioms. Learning an idiom, you have to to understand the idiom. You also have to know the origins of it, like ants in your pants, barking up the wrong tree.
Well, you
so on
don't
and so
really
forth.
need to know where it comes from, but you at least need to know the translation.
Right.
I mean, I don't even know where it comes from, but I know what it means. I don't know literally where ants in your pants comes from.
Fire ants. I believe it was fire ants.
No, I figured that even regular ants in your pants is going to be incredibly uncomfortable. But how much more do you need to know than that?
Right.
You don't need to know exactly. For example, we're not in Kansas anymore. That we know exactly where that came from. Just about everybody knows where that came from. That came from a specific movie. Blah blah blah. And a lot of our idioms these days actually come from movies that have actually been all over the world. So those ones are easier, but some of the other ones go back farther and farther to where who was the first person who said that? I don't think anybody knows that.
Right.
And that makes kind of a big deal. That
Ooh, that reminds me of something that you will sometimes see in real life. Like certain idioms have been used for so many years that the people in modern times using them may have actually forgotten why they were originally used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. It's like people still use them, but they don't remember it.
Max says, you don't need to know where it comes from, but you need to know more than the direct translation. When you learn foreign language, proper use of idioms are the hardest to learn. That is right. It is. I don't know all of the idioms of French, even though I spent 2 years trying to learn it. Failed miserably. I just don't have the mind for it. You never get them in Japanese. Yep. But I can learn an idiom, but I'm going to look up what it actually means, like where its origin, or as far back as the origin can go, so I can understand it. That's one of the things I do often is, in the real world, I often will dissect something all the way down to its root origin, so I have understanding. And I do that as a player as well. When I'm at the table, when I'm presented a cultural puzzle, I'm going to dig in. I'm going to try to learn about the culture, what it is, its origins, some of their value, mostly the cultural values, so I can interact with the culture in a role play setting. And be respectful to even if it's a made up culture, I'm being respectful to the culture and trying to learn it, even if they hate outsiders. I've had that happen a couple times. So
yeah, I was going to ask about that. What about the situations where, the outside, the newcomer is, completely unwelcome? How do you deal with that? In addition to trying to learn the language, learning a hostile language.
So I'll start with this one. So it starts with trying to gain understanding and respect through action. So when you arrive in a foreign village of, let's say, I'm just going to pick a random one, gnomes, and they're very standoffish. I'm just making this up as I go. The gnomes are being very standoffish. They don't like outsiders. The ways you can earn their respect is learning what problems they are facing and offering to help them solve those problems. Now, some cultures or some individuals, NPCs and such, will likely take offense to this. There are some people even in our society that would take offense to being offered help. However, if you see people struggling, like with a broken wagon wheel, or if presented the right data or right scenario from the game master, you can kind of insinuate yourself into the situation, offering aid and offering comfort. This is often a good way to break the ice with new cultures and new peoples, to kind of get them on your side and have them teach you who they are, what their values are, and their customs, their culture, and their language, because language is necessary for communication, be it for trade, for exchange of ideas or thoughts, for exchange of like rudimentary information. Sorry, my phone just keeps buzzing. I'm going to shut the fucker off. Apologies.
Yeah, it's like trying to learn a culture and language in like 5 minutes. Probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's going to take time.
I can't think of a single, game that actually does any of that correctly. The time required to learn a language is insane. You can spend your whole life trying to learn a language and still not get it right. And games just act like it's no different than learning how to cook. It's
right.
vastly different.
So how can we introduce these challenges or these concepts into the game then? The mechanics for learning a language or bypassing a language are abundant. And in D&D 3.5, you've got comprehend languages, the spell tongues. You can spend 2 skill points to learn a language. You can, do all these things to just bypass it. How can we as game masters introduce the challenge and then offer tools to not necessarily build in or use the bypass, but to get people to want to immerse into the culture?
I mean, honestly, some people probably would just never do that just because that's not something that they like outside games either. Just different strokes for different folks, sort of thing. If the group finds that enjoyable, then go for it. But not everyone does.
Yeah.
It's like,
right off the bat, though, if that's your thing, if you're a language guy, you may, and you want to, indulge that interest. You may want to save it for a group that has the same interest, or hold off on it, and don't go full bore, but give them a little bit of it, a bit of it at a time, and over the course of maybe a campaign, here's a little bit, here's a little bit, here's a little bit more. Oh, but guess what? Because you've played along and you've been taking notes or keeping track or paying attention, here's the reward, and other rewards, like I said, along the way, will make your players understand that, this is going to be a thing in the campaign, or even, the one shot or whatever. And playing along gets you that reward, or gets you that ability to bypass or get to the next stage or something like that. Read your room, read the table, and hopefully you'll find your tribe, you'll find the people that enjoy the same thing, or at least are willing to play along.
I mean, like me personally, the thing I sent you guys on Discord earlier, well, okay, like a week or two ago, but a lot of the pictures that I put into that, those are things that I actually had just saved on my computer's hard drive sitting around because I thought they were cool examples of stuff to look at. And I didn't actually find them just to do that.
No worries, man. You're trying to
Well, I was just mentioning that it's like it's something that I personally find to be highly enjoyable to think about and study because of the fact that it interests me, and I know that it doesn't interest everyone.
Sure.
But these games are all a game of give and take. The players are going to want to do certain things, and the DM's like, okay, fine. And then, why not the DM, get his turn as well, or her turn. I want, for example, I'm running a nautical game. It's all going to be on the ocean, most of it, not every bit of it, but, that's my part. The players are going to want to do things within that setting that I'm probably going to be like, oh man, you know what I mean? So you gotta be, flexible, both as a player and a DM.
Yeah, I mean, part of it's also the presentation. Like, handing someone a piece of paper with a bunch of glagolitic text printed on it, and giving them a decryption key in order to translate it into English. Yeah, a lot of people would be like, "No, I'm not doing that." But if you have them talking to an NPC about what something means, and they don't have to actually go through the work of figuring out each individual letter themselves. I mean, that's a very different way of presenting it in the game.
I mean, I've given players that before, and I know where I made the mistakes at. I would presented hieroglyphics, basically, that were all spelled out in English. I used English syntax to make the cipher. And players figured it out pretty well, or pretty quickly. Hey, Multi, how's it going?
Okay.
I realize I made the mistake by doing this instead of just offering, you find like giving the description of you find ancient text. It seems readable, and give me whatever roll to see if you can understand it. And for the part of the night that the one individual who actually took interest in it was working on the translation. Everyone else was like, okay, well, is there any secret doors we can find? They were looking for other things to do than work on the language barrier. And I took that as a point of inflection, and from then to not present it in that way again. That anytime I presented a new language or an ancient language, I would offer it, to the players, and then they would discuss amongst themselves how to try and decipher it. And then when they came up with a solution, I would nod my head and be like, "Yep, let's here's the information that you discover based on what you can decipher." And it was kind of a percentage game at that point of how much of it do they actually translate, and did they mistranslate anything?
That reminds me of something that was presented in some of the cyberpunk genre games, where you have someone doing this really complex mini game as part of hacking a computer system, and the rest of the people at the game are basically just sitting there staring at them, waiting for them to get done.
Yeah, and that's Max even says this. He's presented ciphers many times and never had an issue. I commend you. You've got some really great players there. My players being very young individuals at the time, and I've said it before that for the most part, from my observations, younger players tend to be more about rolling dice and kicking ass than about role playing. And that's not a slight against them.
It's not just the new guys. Got to remember that
it's
with a
not
lot of older
just
players,
the new guys. No,
a lot of the old guys are, wanting to relive that, or they just don't have the time. They want to get as much bang for their buck before they have to go back to the real world.
My observations are of players who are younger than me doing this for a long time. Over the 25 years I've been game mastering, I've been witness to players who are oftentimes 5 to 10 years younger than me at times. And that's mostly where their thoughts are the combat, or what's the next challenge. And when I say it's a culture challenge or a language challenge or a role play challenge, a majority of them go, "Yep, not interested. Just want to swing my axe." Which, I mean, say what you will about them. That's just the players I had at that time. I have since vetted a large majority of the players and decided I don't play with a lot of those type of players anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just not the game environment that I want to gravitate towards anymore.
Well, I've played with people like that, and their approach to combat tends to be incredibly simplistic, and it's like, okay, so why are we bothering to have choices when you're just going to run straight ahead towards the nearest enemy? Oh boy. Although one of those is my nephew, who is, I think, 11 or so, which, yeah.
No, I like I said, I don't think, like, if that's the way they want to enjoy the game, awesome, good for them. They can enjoy the game that way. I will choose to enjoy the game differently, or the hobby differently. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to languages, like as barriers or challenges, what kind of unique challenges or opportunities can players experience? Whether it be negotiating with foreign powers or deciphering ancient texts. Like, what are some of the challenges we can present to them, and how can we present it?
Well, one example that's probably a classic one is needing to have an interpreter help you with something. I mean, in real life, it's happened a lot of times. It's like, oh, I found this book written in Latin. Who do you know who actually has the ability to speak Latin well enough to read a book written in it? And, go look for someone to do that, which in a TTRPG, you're not going to, send someone on a quest all across the world looking for a language that you don't even know where to find. That's just not going to work. But, if you're at a village where you don't actually speak the language of the locals and you find something written in their language, you could take it to the village and ask the locals what it says.
Actually, Mar, there are a couple of games that would actually, could be a big thing. Call of Cthulhu stands to reason that game can be all about ancient languages without even trying. Especially languages that
Eldritch nonsense.
Right. I mean, that alone. I mean, you could go all over the freaking planet looking for the translation of one single word to get right, and having to double check it and things like that. That would be, ideal for, this whole topic.
Yeah, that's a very specific example, but you could probably make an entire game about where your entire goal for that session is to find a translation for something.
And, seeing as how it's, one of the biggest games on the planet, which is so weird if you think about it. Poor H.P. Lovecraft, that's all I can think, when I think about how popular the game and the genre is. I'm a huge Heinlein fan, but I'm not in the chat there, Scott. But most other games, like with me in real life, I've tried to learn a little bit of a couple of languages, but if I go somewhere and I don't speak it, hire a translator. First thing off the boat, first thing off the plane, whatever. That's just, that should be a given. I'm obviously in a fantasy D&D type of game. That's not exactly an option, but maybe it is. Maybe, you can work that out as, a reason to get an NPC into the party, and you can go all kinds of different directions with that. Is the translator, bilking you for extra money and they're getting a cut every time they help you do a transaction? Or are they actually a spy, seeing what the foreigner's up to? Are they, someone that, will eventually, earn the trust and the friendship of the party? And now this person is, member of the family kind of thing. That sort of thing has happened in real life more times than we could probably shake a stick at.
And this kind of gets into the next major or next topic question. And what are some of the practices game masters can do to create accessible language mechanics in their campaigns, such as providing translations or using universal gestures or symbols? I think back to the Stargate movie. I think it was 1999. They brought on a character named Daniel Jackson, and he was there to translate Egyptian hieroglyphs. And then when they finally get through the Stargate, he's able to start picking up pieces of a language that hadn't been spoken on Earth for nearly 2,000 years, actually longer. And he was able to, so he acted in the role of the translator, and he was basically there as thank you, 1994, Legion of Myth corrected me on that. Thank you. I remember seeing it when I was living at my parents', and I remember the movie being a lot better than the television show for a while. But they did do some of that
TV show. I'd rather watch paint dry.
The TV show went wonky after a little while. Nevertheless, they did stick with the languages as barriers in the early parts of the TV show. They would get to a land and they would have a language barrier that they had to overcome. And that's what Daniel Jackson's whole job was to do, was to overcome those language barriers. There's nothing saying in your own games that you can't offer a translator who might travel, or a tradesman who's traveled to the PC's lands to offer translations at a cost. What other ways can you make languages accessible in your campaigns?
I think I went over all the ones I know of: the Babelfish, the translator, the universal translator, the hired translator, um, spells and scrolls and magic items, and
I mean,
I really don't think there are that many.
in sci-fi oriented settings, something that's some fictional settings play with in great detail is the idea of using telepathy or some sort of electronic assistant to basically copy a language database into someone's mind.
Not Babylon 5. Barsoom. They had the potion that John Carter drank, and now he could, speak Barsoomian.
Oh, wait. That reminds me. There was a series of books I read about a guy who it didn't go to Mars, but went to some other planet with very similar to Earth-like conditions, where all of the people there were descendants of people who've been taken from Earth to that planet by aliens for reasons
maybe
I don't
it was
understand.
Carson Napier.
Sorry, I you broke up there.
I was saying, was it possibly Carson of Venus?
No. It wasn't a real planet. It was a planet that the person who wrote this book's made up. Well, Gore was the name of the planet.
Oh, jeez.
But one of the plot points in that, though, is that the reason why the mage priests, or whatever the heck he called them, who were the bug people who were actually the true masters of technology on Gore, the reason they knew so much about stuff is that most of the knowledge they had was their method of learning things as children was basically to have an encyclopedia uploaded into their brains directly.
Okay.
And when the main character meets them, they decide to do that to him, although with only a few books, not the entire set of encyclopedias, which teaches him all sorts of things about the way they do stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's kind of like a Rosetta Stone for them to use, to get the ball rolling. Yeah, and there's a multitude of ways of handling this in the game, and I think we've covered pretty much all of the main ones. Let's see here. When exploring stranger foreign cultures, this is another facet of the TTRPG genre, is to explore these foreign cultures. So when doing so in role play, what I would like to see more of is players actually wanting to get involved. But to do that, game masters have to kind of put in the effort into the culture. But it has to be a give and take. It has to be on both sides. And I don't see it often at the table. Maybe it's the tables I've been at. Maybe it's the maturity level of the groups I've played with. But I rarely see cultures, like strange and different cultures, actually being presented in any other way than what the cultures I'm already familiar with are like. I'm not gonna bash on any of the game masters I've had, or even on any of the players I've had, and because I think it comes from a lack of understanding of other cultures to begin with.
Well, I mean, there's this old saying, when it comes to writing, you write what you know. If you haven't experienced something, it's hard to write it. If you haven't seen something, how can you describe it, and so on. It goes the same way with culture, is that certain cultural constructs, the fact that they're alien to you means that your mind doesn't actually understand them, and therefore, you can't describe them. And that's one thing I've seen a lot of people do with making up new cultures. Is that a lot of people will go like, "Oh, these guys are like that," except that when you actually pay attention, the person making the comparison is actually just doing it via analogy, and it's not what the original author intended. It's just similar.
Right. I mean, and to that end, when I'm building my own worlds, I'm actually currently working on, like I've said multiple times before, I'm working on a Bronze Era game of my own game world. So I'm digging deep into the cultures that made up the prehistory of the world, and knowing like where the world goes, like into the far-flung future, I can kind of work backwards from that to the point of my prehistory, seeing where the cultures came from and where they went. But I think having an understanding of the culture's values goes a long way. I think, if you can understand a culture's values, you can derive a lot of valuable information as a game master to put into context for players to be able to understand. And whatever those might be, they could be, God, wow, I am failing on my words tonight. It's been a bit of a long day for me. My apologies. I'll let you guys talk while I reconstruct my my phrase here. So I'll leave you with this question: when you're creating a new culture or for your players to experience, what do you, or how do you go about it? So where do you start by creating this new culture for them to explore?
You got to make it interesting. You got to understand what the players will find interesting. You need to know your players. Obviously, if it's a brand new group and things like that, then you can start with some generics, of what would be interesting to a fighter or a priest or a wizard or a thief. How can they, build this new culture easily, by getting to learn, their customs and their ways, and then you can find a weakness and, rip them off, I suppose. Or, you could do what has worked for the entirety of human existence, and that's sexual attraction. How many people have become completely fascinated by a culture because they were fascinated by the opposite sex, let's go with, people who have a thing for this type of man or woman, and then they want to learn everything about the culture. Well, you have somebody walk, past the PC, and let them know that this is the most beautiful so-and-so you've ever seen in your life, and take it from there. And watch how the player learns, because that's how we've done it on Earth, since the beginning of time, when cultures started mixing, and, that whole opposite attraction thing, here's a strange, mysterious new culture, and the men or the women are, absolutely, beyond anything you've ever seen before. And next thing you know, the players, or real people at least, are, fascinated and now interested in learning everything about this new place, especially if the I'm sorry, I saw the chat and I've lost my where I was going with this. I'm not going to say train of thought because I saw what that got someone into recently. Yeah, just if the players are actually interested in playing a real character who is more than just an adventurer and someday wishes to settle down, and have a family and do the domain play thing, then how much more interesting could that be? Uniting two cultures, and now you're, a lord of this country or this kingdom, and you also have ties to another kingdom because of, your husband or your wife.
I mean, well,
Great piece of tale, as the saying goes. Yeah, sure. And
I mean,
hey, Multi meant to say something earlier.
Go ahead, Mar.
well, one of the things that I was thinking of when Jade asked the question was, how it kind of felt like he was asking, like how would you define a culture in a way that makes them interesting? And I mean, for me, it's like I start out as just like, who are these people? What are they doing with their lives? And then go from there with whatever makes sense.
No, I realize that, but with the way I was looking at it, it doesn't matter anymore. You just make them, want to be interested by the way we've always been interested in other cultures. It was either to take stuff from them or to, breed with them.
I mean, in some ways that ends up being the same thing, but yeah.
But so I'm guessing. So
Then you don't have to
my
work
thoughts
you
here
don't
on
have to really work that off.
my thoughts here on are this: when you develop a culture for your campaign world, they should have a few things to them to kind of round them out. And it's probably a good idea to like jot down in order, what does the culture value? Is it is it wealth? Or actually, I should say it goes beyond wealth or objects. A culture's values are things that are sometimes immaterial. It could be valor, it could be victory, it could be a good death. Hell, it could be light-colored eyes. Like they value someone who has light-colored eyes because their religious texts say that their gods had light-colored eyes.
This reminds me of a movie, Big Trouble in Little China. Remember how Lo Pan was specifically looking for a woman with green eyes? Do you remember why?
Wasn't she supposed to be like an oracle or some such?
Nope. Lo Pan had been cursed centuries ago to be unable to, live life as a normal human being.
Oh, okay.
And he had to sacrifice a woman with green eyes to lift the curse that he was afflicted with.
Okay. It's been a very long time since I've seen that film.
Yeah, I've only seen it once.
But yeah, so if your culture that you're creating has like certain values, you can start to and make them concrete, like unchanging, unflinching, no matter like what happens. These are their values. And then the players, when they interact with that culture, they should have some way, like if Shadow, for example, said, if they're trying to chase that random piece of tail, for sexual attraction or whatever, they're going to try to take the time to learn about that person and their culture. So having a strong set of cultural values goes a long way to setting up the barriers of that culture. Like if your character, for example, if your PCs are all of dark colored eyes, I'm going to use the light eyes example, are all of dark colored eyes, and the people that they are interacting with are light colored eyes, they are not going to give the PCs the time of day. Why? Because they're not of their culture. They're dark eyes. They're not light eyes. So why should we have to worry about them?
They look at your face and immediately think outsider. We don't like you.
Right. So that sets up a cultural barrier that the players will have to try to circumnavigate. And how they do that is as important as them actually doing so. This is a role play challenge more so than a combat challenge or a challenge of strength or determination. It's how are they going to get around it when they are viewed as such, like whatever the case might be.
Yeah, and you know, it's like the specific details. Well, I mean, you know, it's a specific story with a unique set of circumstances, and the exact details. Well, that's something you might end up making up on the fly as you go along.
Scott says, speaking of culture and religion, a culture may not have a black and white morality. They might have a different axis, blue-orange morality base. Yeah, I mean, you could have that where, I'm gonna throw this to Dark Sun for a moment. I know a lot of people don't care for Dark Sun, and a lot of people really, really don't care for the Hobbit-like race there. If I can remember what they're called. Kinder. A lot of people don't like the Kinder because they've been misplayed for a very long time. The Kinder have no sense of personal ownership on things. To them, a tool is owned by the community, or it's not owned at all. It's there to be used, so they pick it up and use it.
That's actually a thing that exists elsewhere, not just in fantasy, but here on Earth. I think that's probably where they got that from. I know because my mother-in-law, she has absolutely no concept of that, and I'm like, that's mine. Get your hands off.
But you know that is a cultural aspect that, you know, it's a challenge that'll have to be overcome. Like if you're dealing with a bunch of Kinder, it's not that they are to them, they're not stealing it, they're using it because it's a tool. It's meant to be used. It's food. It's meant to be eaten.
I think part of why that annoys some people so much is because it feels real to them in a way they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
There's just almost everyone's met at least one person in real life who tends to be like, oh, I kind of feel like I needed this more than you did, so I decided to use it.
Yeah, the was it entitlement concept where people feel like they're entitled to things. But if that is their cult, if that is the culture that the players are having to deal with, and I want to remain in game sense of things. If that is the kind of culture that the players are having to deal with, it's, you know, how do you circumnavigate the culture's values and still deal with them? You know, if it is a culture that has communal, you know, ownership over everything that in their town, like it doesn't matter what house they sleep in, it doesn't matter what blanket they grab, so long as they are able to live comfortably. Like how do you present that in such a way that players can circumnavigate it, you know, and set them up for success? You know, how can you do that?
I mean, besides showing them the road out of town?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, you need the players to come to an understanding of the way the world works that they are playing in. And you don't necessarily need to, you know, just give them all of that up front, but you need to at least give them something to work with in order to find a way to deal with it.
I agree. So to that end, you know, you might have an elder of the culture explain the concepts of ownership are foreign to them. That the concepts of personal ownership over tools is such a foreign concept that they just don't grasp it. But that the elder may have heard of it before, and that they will speak to their people about it. So things don't go missing.
Yeah,
but
that one's a really bad example. because I could just see too many players just, it may have worked in the novels, like Dragonlance or whatever, something like that, where, no harm, no foul at the end of the day. But PCs are just going to look at that as just another way of
Well,
the
I mean,
DM trying to
Scott Clark gave us an example of a reaction that a player character might have. It's a very
Murder
simple
hobo, then.
reaction.
Yeah.
that sort of mentality doesn't exist really anywhere that I know of, other than maybe a few small places. That's just not really a thing. That's a kind of like not a great example, for me anyways.
Well,
Just because
so
there's so many laws to the contrary now.
Oh, I mean, it's something that people in a TTRPG might do, even if it's something they would never consider in real life.
right. And I think a lot of people have a hatred for Kinder because of how players misused the culture. Because there are a lot of stories dating back to the early days of Dark Sun, where players would pick Kinder so they could get away with stealing because it was culturally correct for them. They would just take whatever they want and use it and whatnot, or profit off of it. But that's where the misconception started, is that they were able to take and then profit.
That's just blind. That's just shit players.
It is.
I mean, you want to be a thief, just run a thief. I've
Right.
run several thieves. I'm going to run more, and I'll have no qualms about, being open about what I am.
The concept there was that they thought they could get away with just taking whatever they want and then profiting. Well, that's the problem. Kinder didn't profit. Kinder used. They didn't sell.
I mean, yeah,
They
they might borrow your thing and accidentally break it and then forget to give it back, but they're not going to just like steal it and pocket the money.
Right.
Well, yeah, they probably had no concept of money either then.
I can't actually remember the details of Kinder. I do remember it coming up as a frequent problem race in Dark Sun.
Sure, but
my understanding of Kinder, which does not come from actually playing TTRPGs with them, that's just never come up in any of the games I played. But I read some of the novels based on that setting, and the way that the novels described them was that they were just kind of had a simplistic way of interacting with other races, which annoyed the crap out of almost everyone in universe. But
yes.
Most races had, some concept of trading with the Kinder. So, I don't really understand exactly how it worked. Just that they did have trade relations.
Reading. Yeah, I'd have to go dig out the books and read up on it again. It's been a while. So, how can...
I'll just bring that up because, it suggests to me that the Kinder did have some sort of concept of money, even if it's a weird one. I just don't know exactly what it is.
They didn't value money. They understood what money was, but they didn't value it, as my understanding is. Now, I know things have changed since they've come out with the new Dark Sun, but I don't know how things have changed because I haven't looked into the new Dark Sun.
They weren't doing that.
Yeah. I think there was a new Dark Sun that came out.
The opposite, that they could possibly ever do it because of the slavery, of the defilers, just a whole bunch of things that were just problematic in this current environment.
Well, then I really don't know. I've been kind of out of the loop on everything that is owned by WotC currently. So,
better man than I am.
Well, I'm looking into other RPGs, so because there's more out there than just D&D.
Oh, I've never played a WotC product in my life, but I can't help but hearing it in my travels.
So
And thus having
how can we
opinions.
make how can we make the barriers a role play objective? Whatever the cultural barrier, the value barrier might be, how can we make this a role play objective to as a hurdle to get by, like mechanically speaking or role play speaking? Like, what can we do as game masters to present this?
Can you elaborate more on the objective part?
So during role play, part of the aspect of dealing with another culture is learning not just the language, but also what the culture values, and using it for either virtuous or devious advantage. And it takes, so this is something that's going to take time and player participation at the table. So when presenting a culture, how do you present the barriers and as methods or goals to overcome for the players and learn about the culture?
That's a toughie.
One actually several different Hyperborea games I've been in played with that in some way or another. I mean, like, there's one where I think that the specific module was called Cragoth Manor, where learning about the history of Cragoth Manor meant finding stuff and reading it, because there were like journals and diaries and stuff left by people who had lived in Cragoth Manor, some of which are still alive, some of which aren't. And learning about the history of Cragoth Manor would give you knowledge of, like, oh, if we want to find this thing, we need to go there. And then there was this hilarious moment where someone wakes up this undead girl who is sleeping in a coffin and then gets his fishman face punched off. That was one of those players who is the, shall we say, think first, ask questions maybe type.
Yes.
But it's like the hints with that one, though, is that, if you read the diaries, they kind of sort of tell you what's in this room, and maybe possibly you should leave it alone.
Shadow, you kind of touched on this earlier by presenting a romantic interest. That is a prime example of a barrier you can set before a player as an objective. Like, the objective is to get to know this person well, as the saying might go. But how do they do that? Like, what can they do to get to know this person well?
Right. Well, depending on the culture, that could be, incredibly easy or absolutely impossible. I've read various novels where, depending on the culture, it was literally one or the other. So, if that was the issue, then, you are going to have to learn all about the culture. But, things as simple as just buying and selling, understanding the currency, exchange, or how to even, get to somewhere where you can exchange the currency. Maybe in this country they use something completely different than gold, because gold is either valueless or instantly confiscated, and suddenly you have no way to make transactions.
I mean, an example in real world is that some regions just historically didn't have gold mines, so they used something other than gold as a trade currency. Like
they may not even know what gold is.
The ancient Greeks actually used as a trade currency pearls for some reason I don't understand.
They had an abundance of them.
Well, I mean, it's the Mediterranean. Yeah. seafood everywhere.
Maybe not in abundance, but it was something that they came across that seemed attractive to the eye, and yet at the same time, not everybody could get one, and therefore, when not everybody can get one, everybody wants one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I figure that a lot of them probably got harvested as part of collecting food, because
Absolutely.
clams, oysters. The Greek Isles had a lot of coastline to find such things. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that you can just like pick up a handful just walking down the beach. It takes a lot of time and effort to find enough to fill your hand. Right.
But it also seems that almost everything like that of value has sort of something you would call beauty to it. Gold has that shine, gemstones and pearls have light reflecting qualities that apparently is pleasing to the eyes. Even strangely enough, some animals like crows and ravens will gather sparklies, and for whatever reason they are attracted to them. And I think something in the biological brain of living creatures has a sort of pleasure center or pleasure derived from something like that. And in another culture, they might have something that has the same effect.
It might be a slightly different thing, though.
Right. And once the players, come to know that new sparkly, let's say, maybe it's, a particular kind of, jade or something like that, because that's what they have, or they have some. And now the players, become immensely interested in this new substance because, when they leave, they want to take a little bit with them just to have a memento of their travels. And in doing so, they are going to learn about the ways of getting it. And in learning the ways about getting it, they're going to have to deal with the people who they can get it from, and thus come at those people in a positive light, unless they just want to steal it, which probably...
I did say for virtuous or devious advantage.
Right,
yeah.
Right,
I mean, I've seen stories where, the crux of the story is, our goal is to steal something. Us as a team working together need to find a way to steal it and escape with it and not get killed in the process. I mean, it's a thing that you can have as the story focus. You can even throw in an honorable reason for it because, it's like, why is this thing not where you want it to be? Maybe, maybe it was stolen by someone and you're working for the people that are its rightful owners and trying to help them retrieve what's rightfully theirs.
That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that about the not plastic, but I mean, that makes sense, but that's interesting, Mark.
I have actually been to picnic grounds where they posted signs warning people about that.
Oh, wow.
That's interesting. So
yeah, I can't imagine someone bringing back silverware to a picnic, but at least the Rangers were nice enough to let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if one of those birds steals it, you're not getting it back.
No.
Well,
and to touch on the romance option as well as far as culture goes, I actually have seen this in example. So the game master who was running is a friend of mine, and he presented a love interest for one of the player characters. And I kind of covered this lightly when we did the romance topic, but the characters were of two different cultures. Garen was a ranger or druid hybrid thing from a class from Pathfinder hybrid classes for 1E.
Okay.
And he had this mysterious, secretive background that he would never tell anyone about. But a lot of that was his culture, how he was raised, his values. And as the player who was playing that NPC, because I took it on as a cohort, for the game master to keep that character around and to keep working on that player, and trying to get them to role play better than just kill it, make it dead. The player was very new to the game, had never really experienced role play, to my knowledge. So I was kind of working on all of the new players, trying to get them to actually interact with and role play with not just my character, but the NPCs that I would run for the game master, kind of like a co-DM ship, even though I was playing, because I was never privy to any of his plans. But one of the things that I remember being difficult was prying out his character's history, because his whole thing was he doesn't talk about it. He does, he keeps it secret, he keeps it safe, type mentality. So that to me, as a fellow player, was a role play challenge that I had to try to navigate. And I was able to use the NPC, my cohort NPC, the romance interest, to try to do so. Ultimately, he did open up to that NPC, but not the rest of the party, which that's fine. I still got him to actively role play and give exchange with the NPC, and that was my goal. That was kind of a small victory for me as a player and for the game master as a game master, to get at least one, if not all, of the players at the table to open up and actually role play their experience. And her culture was of a religious background, so religious, and she was also a farmer's daughter. So her, she was trying to work on him on a religious aspect, trying to get him to open up and be a better person while trying to understand him. So it was quite the role play adventure for both me and that other player.
That's cool.
So from a culture's values and their most oftentimes their location, we can kind of distill some, if not most, of the visual cues of a culture. And this is a kind of a bigger thing that kind of helps explain the culture a little bit. When you're developing a new culture, not only do you need to have their values, and they might have their own language, but they have cultural values. They also have certain visual indicators that set them apart from other cultures. These visual indicators are something that holds significance to their culture in some meaningful way. For example, it could be a mountain culture of traveling people who value woven tweeds of natural colors, of browns, of greens, of stonewashed colors. But people who wear the color of, let's say, saffron are people who they respect, because saffron is hard to get. It's a color that you don't see often. So when they see someone with saffron, they think, oh, this must be royalty or divinity that we're seeing, because they have enough saffron in their clothing to actually stand out. They must be of someone of great importance. So this kind of mixes their value with also the visual indicator of what the culture values as well.
It's kind of like the old dress for success thing, but maybe possibly the king will execute you if he finds out you're not supposed to be wearing that.
Yep. Like the royal colors. If you wear the royal colors, your head's on the chopping block. And this can actually be presented in a way to players that, they might come from a culture where the, standard colors of wearing are deep purple and reds. But when they get to this foreign land, the deep purple and red is reserved specifically for royalty. Anyone else caught wearing the colors are hunted down, or they're brought to, or they're imprisoned immediately because they're impersonating royalty, whether they know it or not.
Well, in real life, though, also heraldry. A lot of the time, a colored embroidery would indicate clan affiliation. And if you're an outsider to the region and you don't know that, and you happen to be wearing the wrong color of clothing, people might get unhappy with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you would have to foresee those events prior to getting to the actual town or village. You got to give them clues. You got to give them, you can't just throw them in. They walk into a town and they walk in and they're, suddenly they're arrested. That you got to give them some clues.
Well, in one of Yield Geeks games, the module was a rather interesting one where it's just like you're present day people who get displaced into the past and have to, deal with that. One thing that I figured out personally early on that was apparently something that, you're kind of sort of supposed to be able to figure out is that the character I was playing, if I was to actually ever speak my whole name, the people in the village would jump on me because of the fact they would see me as an enemy. Because the fact that my character had Norman ancestry and we had been displaced to a period in England's past when the Normans were considered their hated enemies from across the English Strait.
Okay.
But that was one of those things. It's like they didn't notice anything as long as I didn't tell them my family name.
But you knew that at the beginning of the game, right?
Well, I figured it out quickly. It wasn't something that he directly told me would happen at the beginning of the game. It's something that I figured out because of the fact that I am a fan of reading history stuff, and I know the difference between, Normans and Frisians. And,
Gotcha.
Latecomer to the show, but Conall has entered the stream. Welcome, Conall.
Hey.
Good evening.
Good evening, good sir, and top of the evening to the chat.
So, the current topic is, the visual indicators of a culture, and like having these visual indicators intrinsically tied to what they value or some of their core values, as a means of, I am having a problem with word salad today. I am so sorry. It's been a long day of thinking. So the current conversation is visual indicators when you're developing a culture and why they're important, as well as whatever contextual clues they might offer to players as to what the culture might value.
Okay.
Have you ever had experience with this yourself, Conall?
Yes, I've actually ran a campaign. It was homebrew. I've actually ran this. I tweeted. I read the Aragon series, not Lord of the Rings, with the one with the dragons, and
the one that 14-year-old wrote, right?
Right, that one. And I thought it was an interesting concept that the only way to do magic in that world was to speak Draconic, to speak the language of dragons, because dragons was magic. You need one for the other to work. So this was back when 4.0 was making its slow recline, and I was running. I think it was Pathfinder. Anyways, I told the sorcerer, I told anybody who wants to be a magic user, I'm like, listen, this is the deal. I don't care what race you take. But if you want to be a magic user, you have to speak Draconic, because only way magic works is using the tongue. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. The clerics I kind of give a pass to, but it was more about arcane magic over divine magic. Then when you go into different towns, you know how you're driving into a new town and you see those signs outside the town, home of the Freemasons, home of the Lions Club, whatever, right? You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
the town I live in has one of those.
Well, outside in the small towns, it would have like certain symbols, like no magic can be used in this town. No this, no that.
No witches.
Yes. What?
No witches.
No witches. I had a little bit guns in there, so there's another sign that said no guns allowed. If when entering town, drop them off at the local. Peace officers.
So
Not
we all know
police
how
officers.
gun-free zones work.
Right, not police officers, peace officers. So so what you're talking about, I did kind of give them whenever they were coming to a new village, in a city, because there was only two types, or villages and cities. There was no metropolises, there were no thorps, there was just those two things. I kind of laid out what they were to expect when they go into said town. What kind of language? If the language was mainly in Elven, it was an Elven city. If it was in Dwarven, which is in runes, it would be mainly a Dwarven village, or stuff like that. Little hints, little crumbs to let the players know what they're about ready to walk into.
So, if your players didn't speak the language, what kind of challenges did they face?
Normally, a night at inn was a copper. You don't speak a language, that could be a gold.
Monetary challenge.
If you don't know the language and you're trying to bargain with the merchant, the innkeeper, the saloon keep, whatever, they have you at a disadvantage, because their word is the law of the land, because that's how businesses work. It's they're saying you can bargain back and forth, but you have to understand the language at hand. And if you don't, you're that dumb American in Italy trying to get a piece of bread that should only cost X and it ends up costing Y, because you do not know the language of the people that you're dealing with. Now, at the same time, I didn't let any of my players, because I abused the hell out of it. I did not let the players take what's an able learner, where they can learn like 15 freaking languages all at once, or some nonsense like that. No, if they wanted to learn
Daniel Jackson's at your table.
Right. If they wanted to learn a new language, they would have to find somebody to teach them. There is power in language. I didn't want to just give that out freely.
Well, it just shows kind of an ignorance of languages when games allow such absolute misuse of that. It's a big deal. I know I've tried to learn various languages, and without, you can try and just learn it from a book, but you have to use it. And,
being fully immersed in a culture. If they were in a village for long enough, let's say their home base was in a village that spoke nothing but Dwarven, being immersed, and eventually you'd pick up a few phrases.
As a kid, I learned a little bit of German just from watching Hogan's Heroes.
Right, but that's not going to get you very far, if you were dropped there. But being dropped there would get you a lot farther. I went to Mexico by myself. I didn't speak a word of Spanish, and I'm still alive. I didn't just go to Tijuana. I went, several hundred miles deep in, like I said, by myself, and I learned more from being there than the Spanish class I was taking.
I guess I didn't run into anyone in Mexico who speaks Quechua.
I always found, when learning a language, even if you could transfer this over to your gaming, when it's come to learning lessons, it's always fun to learn the bad words first.
Yeah, we said that at the top of the night.
Oh, sorry. It's like I learned sign language. That sign language could be used for thief's hint or drow.
Well, that's what
drow language.
that was actually what it was, kind of, believe it or not, in the original player's handbook. It was mentioned that it was mostly sign language. That way, it was quiet.
Right. And the first thing I learned how to say was stop being a raging cock blister in sign language. And the person who was teaching me sign language was like, of all the things to learn, why that one? I'm like, why not?
Yeah. Yeah, that was something we touched on at the beginning of the night was, one of the very first things you learn is how to curse in the new language.
It's fun.
And it's very true. A lot of people do that.
Yeah, I know for a fact it's true. My wife, she's like amazed that the little bit of Spanish I knew included some of the words that she had never used in her life. And like, yeah, we use those words every day. That's why I need to know those words. I'm going to use those more than I'm going to use a whole lot of other words. Not
if
really
I'm a stranger in a strange land, I got somebody mad at me, cussing at me, I want to know what he's saying, so I know the variety of, do I need to leave the room, or is this something I could deal with? And that can also be translated into storytelling for your game. Because
well, not only that, it actually can get, knowing the curse words can actually get you out of a lot of trouble, or it can get you into a lot of trouble, just by letting them know that, if for example, I was at a bus stop, and there were a couple of guys new to the country speaking Spanish, and they looked over at me and said something, and I knew exactly what they said about me. I didn't know anything else, and I just looked at them and went, "Okay," and they're like, "Uh-oh," and their whole attitude changed. It's like, "Oh shit."
I think
they thought they were badass because, for whatever reason, they were teenagers. And then I just looked at them, and let them know I understood, and they stopped talking that way.
I think
because they didn't want to actually have to put their money where their mouth was.
I was going to say, I think language is an absolutely beautiful thing. I think if it's done correctly in game, and it turns to, I mean, it's not by itself the the master capstone for the game, but it does bring a era of elegance, I want to say, to a campaign done correctly.
I don't know about that.
I would say that language and culture both, as well as maybe even the customs of a culture, if done really well, can lead to some amazing role play. I know it's something that I don't see often at the tables that I've been at, is, emphasis on culture, emphasis on the role play of a culture or getting to know a culture. It's not something that comes up often. And I think it's maybe it's the tables I play at, maybe it's the groups I've been with that wasn't our focus. But I think from a, introspective look over the last 25 years of my gaming experience, that is something I want to fix. That's something I want to focus on, especially when because I'm a world builder. I build entire ecosystems and worlds, and I know how the continents move. I know all of the tectonic plate movements. I know why the mountain ranges are, the way they are and the height they are. I understand all of that from a geological perspective. But I don't have a firm grasp on culture, and that's because that's not something I focused on when I was a young person. I didn't focus on culture. Thankfully, I married a social scientist who did focus on culture and the importance therein.
There's that attraction thing again going on for you.
Yeah, I understand geography. She understands culture and people.
That makes so much sense now. That so tracks for you too.
So, like, while I can understand, I can explain like why the mountain ranges are formed the way they are. She can help me develop cultures that are unique to themselves and still interact with the world around them and the other cultures next to them. Like, I might have two cultures. I'm actually going to use just two of the ones I have in my head right now. The Ashen Ra people of the peaks are at constant odds with the Burba Tau people or the Tau tribes of the lakes. The Tau tribes are expansionist, and the sun worshipping Ashen Ra also value strength, valor, and honor. But when they come together in an area, they're going to clash and collide because they have two different perspectives on what is honor, what is valor. And the fact that the Tau are trying to push into the Ashenra people's areas of cultivation to take it over for themselves, that causes the friction. And that is going to lead to cultural problems that my players may experience if they choose to go in that direction for the campaign I want to run. So they might actually get to meet the Ashenra or the Tau people and try to understand them and bring about cultural change, or maybe war. Who knows? It depends on how they want to pursue it. Yes, Conall.
I absolutely love that thought. I just want to say that actually makes a great deal of sense to me. I know Mark Hawkman brought up history earlier. When it comes to the dwarf languages, I actually use real language. I use runes. The elder father, I can't.
Futhark.
Futhark runes, white note, and yeah, it's been a long day as well. In runes, and I'll pass that to one of my players. And depends on what table I am. I've been lucky enough to have at least two people I've gamed with that actually knows how to read said language, because I don't think anybody's spoken it in forever.
I have a wall hanging written in Elder Futhark because of the fact that several of my ancestors used that language. I don't really speak it, but it's something I intentionally learned.
Right. So when I pass the note to one of the players, I got a few people at the table scratching the back of their head, like, I have no idea what that says. And I got two of the guys like, oh, I know what this says. And it adds more to the game when you can actually write out a language that you and maybe one, if not the rest of the party, understands. I'm learning Gaelic.
But isn't that metagaming though a little bit?
You can't help but what you know.
Okay, I'll remember that.
As long as they don't,
you know what I mean? Because that to me, I just hear metagaming.
Yeah, I would agree. That is metagaming. But part of role playing is having some of that meta knowledge. Like if you, the player, understands the cultural values, if your player understands it, but the character hasn't picked up on it yet, like, are you actually going to penalize the player for picking up on the social cues of a particular culture when their character shouldn't have? Are you going to actually penalize them for trying to role play?
Well, I mean, because I always get when I play a thief, I get a ration of crap from the GM because I know how locks work and how I know how to jimmy things and do certain things that come along with that. I can't help knowing what I know. You know what I mean? So
it's a weird catch-22. It really is, because if you want to add something special to the campaign, you're either going to penalize, as you said, penalize for people who actually know what it says. So do you take it out? Do you just say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to add that extra splash of coolness to it? Or do I just write everything in English, which everybody reads anyways?
Yep. Probably what I would do.
So, with only 5 minutes remaining for the evening, I would like to, in brief, cover what I think the bare minimum of what a game master needs to create a culture and as a framework, so to say. to introduce to players, and that is the culture's value. Like, what do they value? The visual cue of the culture. What do they wear? What kind of symbols do they have present at all times? Something that can be relatable to the trigger custom and language or greeting of the culture. So these two are intrinsically tied to one another. A trigger custom is like a handshake, a bow, a motion of the arms to make like a rising sun, whatever the case might be. It's part of their culture, their custom. And then the greeting is something like top of the morning. Like it's a phrase, one or two, or maybe even a full sentence that they use. With these four things, you can quickly framework a culture, a new culture for your players to interact with. And in working within this framework, you can present it to your players as a roleplay objective for them to get to know and understand the culture that you are presenting. But keep it interesting and keep it, don't hold so harshly to it that, it prevents role play from happening. Like, give it to them to interact with. So, any final thoughts on culture, language, and customs? Shadow, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Said it before, say it again. Know your table, know what they care about. Don't try to, force your pet interests onto the group if you think there's going to be some resistance, especially a lot of resistance. A little bit here and there, now and then. That's only fair. You as a DM and as players, you got to have some give and take. But if your players absolutely despise puzzles, for example, don't waste your time. There's already enough trouble with the hobby, people leaving after 8 games. If you want the campaign to last longer than 6-8 games, you're going to have to, really suck them in. And it's real hard to do that if you keep, putting things in their way that they can't, enjoy. So know your table, know your friends, and, good luck.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on the topic, Mar Hawkman?
One of the most interesting things that I've learned when studying real-world languages is the idea of a written trade language. Because that's actually a thing some of the old cultures did. It's like, actually learning to speak the other guy's language was a lot harder than learning how to write something that was mutually recognizable. And, communicating with other people, whether it's in a TTRPG or in real life, it doesn't need to be verbal. And you can use whatever methods you can think of and imagine.
I think it's in the science community that if we were to make contact with an extraterrestrial species, we would start with prime numbers and mathematical concepts.
And then find out they don't use base 10 math.
Well, it doesn't. Actually, I don't think it would matter because prime numbers are prime, regardless of base 10 or not. Conall, any final thoughts on languages, customs, and cultures?
I think language is absolutely beautiful. I've said this once before. Language is a very beautiful thing, and there is power in language for in the game if it's handled correctly. Culture, also, there's nothing more cooler to me than a person who wants to play a particular race and actually did some deep dive in what that culture is about. If he wants to play a dwarf, he holds himself in character to the principle of said dwarf, or an elf, or so forth and so on. So I think, yes.
Nobody lets people run elves. What are you talking about?
Whatever. And what was
Nobody. Everybody's terrified of them.
I ran it half. Have I ever been a full elf? No, I've only done half elves. Uh, but anyways, knowing the culture, the language of the race that you want to play, it being from Forgotten Realms, Pathfinder, or whatever ever you find out that it tickles your interest and has a global culture language background that describes what each one have. Recommend your players to take a good hard look at what they want to do because they'll get something out of it. It's not about rolling dice. It's about having fun and learning something. It doesn't have to be a
Some
rocket
people,
science.
Yeah.
some people might argue that rolling dice is the fun part.
Well,
And other people would argue that they don't want to learn a damn thing.
Then you'll also have those who argue, I'm not playing the race to play the race. I'm playing it for mechanical advantage, which I would say,
Yep.
this is not the table for you.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I've said that to players. Anyway,
Although one of the characters I built, this is a character who left his hometown and found a job that he was well suited for, and it ended up being something that kind of sort of has a mechanical advantage, but there's an in-universe logic for why. I don't know.
present me a actual detailed backstory as to why, and I might allow it. But that is going to wrap our topic for the night. So I'm going to start with Shadow. What do you got going on this week, sir?
Just like it says in the title, Shadow and Son, me and the boy doing some good old-fashioned, wholesome father and son, things that relate to the hobby, painting, crafting, gaming reviews. If you haven't checked us out, come on down, stay a spell, and maybe you might. Sorry, I just dropped something. Maybe you'll enjoy what you see, and if so, hope to see a lot more of you.
Mar Hawkman, do you have a channel, sir?
I do have a YouTube channel. It's just Hawkman. I sometimes do stuff related to TTRPGs, usually more video game stuff than TTRPG stuff, though.
Okay.
Like Star Trek Online.
Is it just Mar Hawkman?
Well, I think it's actually spelled with a space, but yeah.
Yeah, if you can get me a link to your YouTube channel in the private chat or into Discord, I will make sure to get your details linked in the description after the show ends.
Yeah, and expect a sub at least from me by the end of the night.
Okay.
So do you have anything in the works for your channel, Mar Hawkman?
I do have a video I'm planning on doing discussing the concept of alignments in TTRPGs and why they're important. Although it's one of those things I've been thinking about for several weeks and haven't finished yet. So it's one of those things I got kind of like bogged down trying to write a script for it and rethinking what I wanted to actually say, and got complicated. Anyway, I'm probably going to get that done sometime soon.
Alignments are one of those things that I always trip over as well. So I'll look forward to that. Consider me subscribed, sir. Conall, what do you got going this week?
After tonight's show, I probably will do something, see who will stick around and jump in. That's what I got planned tonight. Tomorrow, you all see me with two of the other gentlemen here over at Table Breakers. Well, we'll be talking about something interesting, I'm more than sure. Then Saturday, you'll find me on Bruce's channel, pulling all kinds of shenanigans. And on Sunday, we will be talking about the 1980s fantasy, sci-fi, I don't know what it's really under, Krull, the Krull, the movie that time has forgot for probably good reason.
Yes, that's a movie where whenever I remember it, I forget the name of the main character because my brain tries to think he's Conan.
Either way, yeah, go for it.
I was gonna say, as for me, I do try to conceptualize videos. I have not put out many videos lately because recording times and finding the appropriate time to set aside to record has been difficult for me. I put a lot of effort and energy into making Gatekeepers something that can be enjoyed, and hopefully I have done so this evening. If you have enjoyed the content this evening, please consider hitting the subscribe button to all of the channels linked in the description, and I will make sure that Hawkman's channel gets linked as well. If you really enjoy it, make sure to hit that like button. It helps the channel grow, gets our message out to other people, and hopefully, we can reach more and offer some really great advice, as well as get some more suggestions on future topics. Which, if you have a suggestion for a future topic for the show, consider joining our Discord and just dropping us a message there. I am always active on it, so once you join, I will always be able to set a role for you so you can interact with the community. And that, my friends, is the end of the show. So I thank you for watching. Thank you, chat, for being active and helping us out by offering all the things you've said and suggestions and questions you've had. So with that, I bid you all a very fond farewell. Have a great night, and we'll see you next week.
Go have a beer or a cigar.